On June 26, 2024, Romero Felix Gonzalez was executed by lethal injection in the state of Texas. It marked the final moment in a life shaped by addiction, desperation, and irreversible choices. How does a person reach a point where their story ends in an execution chamber? What decisions slowly closed every other door until death row became the only destination? Gonzales did not arrive at this moment overnight. His life unraveled through years of struggle, instability, and choices that carried lasting consequences. At the center of this case is Bridget Townsend, just 18 years old, standing at the beginning of her life. She had dreams, family, and a future filled with possibility. Simple plans, long-term hopes, and the expectation of tomorrow were all still ahead of her. But on one tragic night, her life collided with Gonzales in a way no one could have anticipated. Fear, impulse, and desperation converged in a matter of moments, changing the course of both their lives forever. What drove Gonzales to make that choice? Was it a single moment of panic, or the result of years of damage left unresolved? When the truth finally emerged, did the outcome represent justice, or did it reveal something more complicated? Was the execution truly an ending, or simply the final chapter in a deeper tragedy? This is not just a story of crime and punishment. It is a story about broken people, irreversible harm, and the lasting impact of human choices. It challenges us to ask difficult questions about accountability and justice. If you want to explore cases that go beyond headlines, subscribe and turn on notifications for more in-depth true crime documentaries today. On the evening of January 15, 2001, Bridget Townsend was just 18 years old, spending the night at her boyfriend Jolie's house in Dilley, Texas. She was young, hopeful, and still standing at the beginning of her life. Bridget had plans for the future and dreams that extended far beyond that small town. She wanted to become a teacher, to build a life defined by purpose and stability. Her family believed in her deeply. Her mother, Patricia Townsend, saw her daughter as a source of pride and promise. Her brother watched her grow into someone who carried kindness and ambition in equal measure. That night was supposed to be ordinary. Instead, it became the moment everything ended. Romero Felix Gonzalez was moving through life in a very different direction. Addiction had consumed him, shaping his decisions and narrowing his world to survival and impulse. His past was marked by instability, poor choices, and a growing dependence on drugs that controlled his actions. On that night, Gonzales entered Jolie's house not with violence in mind, but with desperation. He was searching for money, something he believed would help him feed his addiction. His presence alone carried tension, though no one inside the house could have known what would follow. When Bridget answered the phone, she had no reason to believe she was in danger. She did not know that Gonzales, watching and listening, would see her as a threat to his plan. In his mind, she became an obstacle, someone who could interfere or call for help. Fear began to take over his thoughts. Panic replaced reason. In those moments, his addiction and desperation guided his decisions more than logic ever could. What happened next unfolded quickly, driven by impulse rather than planning. Gonzales forced Bridget into his vehicle. Confused and terrified, she was taken from a place of safety into uncertainty. No one inside the house realized what had happened until it was too late. Jolie was left behind, unaware that Bridget had been taken, unaware that the night was already turning into something irreversible. As Gonzales drove away, every mile created more distance between Bridget and the life she knew. He took her to a remote area, far from the roads and lights of town. The isolation was intentional. Gonzales believed distance would protect him from consequences. The location was his grandfather's ranch in Medina County, a place removed from witnesses and immediate discovery. For Bridget, the fear only grew. She did not know where she was or what Gonzales intended to do. The silence that surrounded them was heavy, broken only by uncertainty and dread. In that isolated place, Gonzales made a decision that could never be undone. Years of addiction, unresolved trauma, and poor choices culminated in a single act of extreme violence. Bridget's life ended there, far from her family and the future she had imagined. Her dreams, her plans, and her potential were erased in a moment that lasted only seconds but carried consequences that would stretch across decades. Afterward, Gonzales left her body behind, abandoned in the wilderness. He returned to his life believing he had escaped immediate consequences. For him, the night ended with distance and silence. For Bridget's family, the nightmare was just beginning. When she did not return, concern quickly turned into fear. Jolie realized something was wrong when hours passed without any word from her. Bridget was not someone who disappeared without explanation. Patricia Townsend held on to hope as long as she could. Every unanswered call and every passing hour deepened the pain. The uncertainty was unbearable. Not knowing where Bridget was or what had happened became its own form of suffering. Law enforcement was notified, and the search began, but there were no immediate leads. No witnesses, no clear direction. Bridget's disappearance became a mystery that haunted everyone who loved her. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The investigation stalled as leads dried up. Bridget's family lived in a state of suspended grief, unable to mourn and unable to hope. The absence of answers was its own cruelty. They did not know that the man responsible for their pain was already entangled in his own criminal path, moving closer to consequences he could not avoid. The truth remained hidden until Gonzales was arrested for a separate crime. While in custody, the weight of what he had done began to surface. Eventually, he confessed. His admission shattered the silence surrounding Bridget's disappearance. It provided answers, but those answers came at a devastating cost. For her family, the confession confirmed their worst fears. The hope they had clung to was replaced with irreversible loss. Gonzales's confession marked a turning point in the case. Investigators finally had direction. But for Bridget's family, knowing the truth did not bring relief. It only confirmed that their daughter was gone, and that nothing could bring her back. The path toward justice had begun, but the damage was already permanent. Gonzales's confession shifted the case from uncertainty to investigation. For months, Bridget Townsend's disappearance had remained unresolved, leaving her family trapped between hope and grief. Now, law enforcement finally had a name, a location, and a direction. Investigators began retracing Gonzales's movements on the night of January 15, 2001, carefully piecing together the timeline he described. Each detail carried weight, not only for the case, but for a family desperate to understand what had happened to their daughter. In October 2002, Gonzales led authorities to a remote area on his grandfather's ranch in Medina County. The location was isolated, far from public roads and daily activity. It was there that investigators discovered Bridget Townsend's remains. The confirmation was devastating. For her family, the discovery ended months of uncertainty, but replaced it with a permanent reality. The hope they had carried, however fragile, was gone. What remained was grief, anger, and the beginning of a long pursuit of justice. The recovery of Bridget's remains allowed forensic experts to begin their work. Evidence collected from the site became critical in corroborating Gonzales's confession. Ballistics testing revealed that the fatal wound was consistent with a rifle Gonzales had access to. That weapon was later found on his grandfather's property, further linking him to the crime. Each piece of evidence strengthened the case, transforming his confession into a narrative supported by physical proof. DNA testing and forensic analysis left little room for doubt. Investigators were able to confirm key elements of Gonzales's account, reinforcing the conclusion that he alone was responsible for Bridget's death. For law enforcement, the case was finally coming together. For Bridget's family, the process was emotionally exhausting. Every new detail reopened wounds that had never healed. Knowing how their daughter died did not make the loss easier to bear. As the investigation moved forward, prosecutors began preparing for trial. Gonzales was formally charged with capital murder. The gravity of the charge reflected the severity of the crime. The legal process moved slowly, as cases of this nature often do. Motions were filed, evidence reviewed, and timelines reconstructed. For Bridget's family, the waiting continued. Justice felt distant, delayed by procedure and time. In 2006, the trial of Romero Felix Gonzalez began. The courtroom became the setting for a painful retelling of events that had already devastated so many lives. Patricia Townsend sat through each day of testimony, listening as prosecutors laid out the details of her daughter's final moments. The emotional toll was immense. Every word spoken in court carried the weight of loss. The prosecution presented a methodical case. They relied heavily on Gonzales's confession, supported by forensic evidence and ballistics reports. They described the abduction, the drive to the ranch, and the act that ended Bridget's life. Their argument was clear. This was not an accident. It was not a moment of confusion. It was a deliberate act committed by a man driven by desperation and addiction, fully responsible for his choices. The defense did not deny that Gonzales was responsible for Bridget's death. Instead, they focused on his background. They described a childhood marked by instability, exposure to substance abuse, and a lack of support. They argued that Gonzales was a product of his environment, shaped by circumstances beyond his control. Addiction, they claimed, clouded his judgment and fueled his actions. Their goal was not acquittal but mercy. Despite these arguments, the evidence was overwhelming. Gonzales's own words, combined with physical proof, left little room for interpretation. The jury listened carefully, weighing the facts against the emotional narratives presented by both sides. After deliberation, they returned with a guilty verdict. Gonzales was convicted of capital murder. The sentencing phase followed quickly. Prosecutors argued that the severity of the crime warranted the harshest punishment available. They emphasized the calculated nature of the act and the irreversible harm caused. The defense pleaded for life imprisonment, citing Gonzales's troubled past and expressions of remorse. Ultimately, the court ruled in favor of the death penalty. When the sentence was read, the courtroom fell silent. Death by lethal injection was imposed. For Bridget's family, the verdict brought a complicated sense of closure. Justice had been delivered, but nothing about the outcome felt victorious. Their daughter was still gone. No sentence could restore what had been taken. As Gonzales was transferred to death row, the case entered a new phase. Appeals were filed, motions submitted, and years passed. For Bridget's family, the legal process became a cycle of waiting and reopening old wounds. Each appeal delayed finality, prolonging the pain. For Gonzales, death row became a place of reflection, isolation, and reckoning. Time moved differently behind prison walls. Days blended together, marked by routine and confinement. The certainty of execution loomed, though its date remained distant. Gonzales began to confront the reality of his actions, not in moments but over years. The crime that once felt distant now defined every aspect of his existence. Life on death row forced Romero Felix Gonzalez into a kind of stillness he had never known. The chaos that once defined his life was replaced by routine, silence, and isolation. Days passed slowly, marked by confinement and reflection. With no distractions left, Gonzales was confronted by the weight of what he had done. The certainty of his sentence left little room for denial. Over time, his focus shifted inward, toward memory, regret, and the consequences he could no longer escape. During these years, Gonzales began to turn to religion. He spent long hours reading religious texts, searching for meaning and forgiveness. Faith became a structure in a life that had lost all direction. He spoke openly about remorse, acknowledging the harm he had caused and the life he had taken. To some, his words sounded sincere. To others, they felt hollow, arriving only after the damage was irreversible. Remorse, no matter how genuine, could not change the past. For Bridget Townsend's family, Gonzales's transformation offered little comfort. Patricia Townsend continued to live with the absence of her daughter, a loss that shaped every part of her life. The passage of time did not soften the pain. Instead, it reinforced the permanence of what had been taken. Each appeal, each delay in the execution process, reopened wounds that never fully healed. Closure remained elusive, stretched across years of legal proceedings. In an effort to demonstrate accountability, Gonzales made an unusual gesture. He offered to donate a kidney to a stranger. Supporters viewed the offer as an act of redemption, a final attempt to give life rather than take it. Critics questioned the timing and intent. For Bridget's family, the gesture changed nothing. No act of charity could undo the loss of their daughter or restore the future that had been stolen from her. As the years passed, appeals continued to move through the courts. Each one delayed the execution, extending the legal process and prolonging the emotional strain on everyone involved. For Gonzales, the delays offered time but not freedom. For Bridget's family, they extended the waiting, forcing them to relive the case again and again. Justice felt suspended, neither complete nor absent. Eventually, the appeals were exhausted. The legal system reached its conclusion. An execution date was set. June 26, 2024, marked the final chapter in a case that had stretched across more than 2 decades. For Bridget's family, the approaching date brought mixed emotions. There was no relief, no sense of resolution. Only the knowledge that the process was finally ending. In the days leading up to the execution, Gonzales was allowed final visits and preparations. The prison atmosphere grew tense, marked by procedure and inevitability. For the staff involved, it was another scheduled execution. For Bridget's family, it was the end of a long, painful journey they never chose to take. The weight of the moment was impossible to ignore. On the day of the execution, Gonzales was escorted into the chamber. The setting was sterile and controlled, designed to carry out the sentence efficiently. Witnesses observed in silence as the process began. Gonzales was given the opportunity to speak. In his final statement, he expressed remorse, apologizing for the pain he had caused. His words acknowledged Bridget's life and the suffering of her family. For him, it was a final attempt at accountability. For Bridget Townsend and her family, the apology carried no healing. Words could not replace their daughter or erase the years of grief. The execution proceeded as planned. The drugs were administered, and within minutes, Gonzales's life ended. The sentence imposed years earlier was fulfilled. The execution marked the official end of the case, but not the end of its impact. Bridget Townsend remained absent from every milestone she would have reached. Her family continued forward, carrying memories instead of a future that should have existed. The justice system had completed its role, but justice itself remained a complicated concept. For some, the execution represented accountability. For others, it raised questions about punishment, redemption, and whether the death penalty truly delivers closure. Gonzales's life ended in the same system that judged him, while Bridget's life ended long before she had the chance to define it. The imbalance remained impossible to ignore as time moves on. The case of Romero Felix Gonzalez and Bridget Townsend continues to provoke reflection. It forces difficult questions about responsibility, remorse, and the limits of justice. Can punishment ever equal loss? Can regret arrive too late to matter? And can a system designed to deliver justice ever fully address the human cost of violence? What remains is a story defined by choices and consequences. A young woman whose life was taken, a man whose actions led him to death row, and families left to live with the aftermath. The legal process ended on June 26, 2024, but the emotional impact will continue far beyond that date. Justice may have been carried out, but healing is a much longer journey. As we reach the end of the story of Romero Felix Gonzalez, the questions left behind are heavier than any verdict. Was justice truly served? Or was this punishment simply the final act in a tragedy that offers little comfort to those who must live with its consequences? Gonzales was convicted of the murder of Bridget Townsend after years of investigation, trial, and appeals, and the justice system ultimately carried out its sentence. Yet for Bridget's family, justice was never a single moment or ruling. It was a long, exhausting journey marked by waiting, uncertainty, and pain that no legal outcome could erase. Bridget Townsend, Bridget's mother, was left to carry the absence of her daughter through every passing year. No sentence, no apology, and no expression of remorse could restore the life that was taken or the future that was lost. Gonzales expressed regret in his final years and again in his final moments, acknowledging the harm he caused and the grief he left behind. But remorse, even when sincere, cannot undo irreversible damage. The question remains whether redemption is possible when the cost is a life that can never be returned. Gonzales spent years reflecting on his actions while on death row, turning to faith and attempting acts of atonement, including an offer to donate a kidney to a stranger. For some, these gestures suggested personal change. For others, they arrived far too late to carry meaningful weight. Bridget's family was left to navigate their own path forward, one defined not by forgiveness or vengeance, but by survival in the aftermath of loss. The death penalty itself remains deeply divisive. Supporters argue it represents accountability and justice for the most serious crimes. Critics question whether it truly serves justice or simply mirrors the violence it condemns. In cases like this, the line between punishment and closure becomes difficult to define. Does execution bring resolution, or does it simply end the legal process while leaving emotional wounds untouched? Bridget Townsend's death continues to raise questions that extend beyond this single case. How should society balance accountability with the possibility of change? Can justice exist without healing? And who decides what justice truly means? The legal system delivered its final judgment, but the moral questions remain unresolved. What do you think about this case? Was justice served, or was something still missing? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories exploring crime, punishment, and the human cost behind the headlines. Your engagement keeps these stories alive, encourages thoughtful discussion, and helps ensure victims are remembered beyond statistics and court records.